For decades, procrastination was treated as a moral failing, a character flaw, a sign of laziness or lack of discipline. Parents reprimanded their children, bosses criticized their employees, and we mentally punished ourselves every time we postponed an important task. Society built an entire narrative around this behavior, portraying procrastinators as irresponsible, unmotivated people, incapable of reaching their true potential. But what if all of that was wrong? What if science had discovered something completely different about why we actually procrastinate? Over the past 15 years, neuroscientists, psychologists, and researchers of human behavior around the world have grappled with this issue with unprecedented intensity. They have not only interviewed procrastinators, but have placed them inside MRI machines, analyzed their brain patterns, studied their neurological chemistry, and tracked their habits over months and years. What they have discovered is not only surprising, it is revolutionary. And it is completely changing how we understand this behavior that affects billions of people across the globe. Before we continue this fascinating journey into the minds of chronic procrastinators, if you're enjoying this content, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know what time you're watching this video. Now, let's dive deep into this discovery that could change your life. The story begins in a laboratory at the University of Calgary, Canada, where psychology professor Piers Steel spent over a decade compiling all the scientific studies ever conducted on procrastination. When he published his meta-analysis in 2007, the work included data from over 800 different studies, involving tens of thousands of participants. The numbers were staggering. Approximately 20% of the adult population identified as chronic procrastinators, a number that had quadrupled in the last 3 decades. Among university students, the statistic was even more alarming, with over 70% reporting regular procrastination. But Steele wasn't just interested in quantifying the problem. He wanted to understand the mechanism behind it. And that's where the first major discovery emerged. When researchers began examining the brains of chronic procrastinators using advanced neuroimaging technology, they found something unexpected. There were real structural differences in the brains of these people, particularly in 2 specific regions, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala, that small almond-shaped structure located deep in the brain, is our emotional processing center. It alerts us to danger, triggers our fight-or-flight response, and makes us feel fear, anxiety, and stress. In chronic procrastinators, scientists discovered that the amygdala tended to be larger and more active. But that wasn't all. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, decision-making, and impulse control, showed less efficient connections with the amygdala. It was as if there was interfering communication between the emotional center and the executive control center of the brain. Imagine for a moment that your brain is a company. The amygdala is the security department, constantly monitoring for threats and sounding alarms. The prefrontal cortex is the CEO, the one who should make rational decisions and keep everyone on track. In a typical brain, when the security alarm sounds, the CEO can assess the situation, calm the security department, and make an informed decision. But in the brain of a chronic procrastinator, it's as if the telephone line between these 2 departments is experiencing interference. The security alarm goes off more frequently and more intensely, and the CEO has difficulty communicating effectively to defuse the situation. Dr. Tim Puisfeld of Carleton University took this research even further. He and his team started asking a different question. Instead of asking, why do people procrastinate, they asked, what are people really doing when they procrastinate? And the answer was revealing. They discovered that procrastination isn't about time management, it's about emotion management. People don't postpone tasks because they don't know how to organize them or because they're lazy. They postpone because the task generates a negative emotion, whether it's anxiety, boredom, frustration, insecurity, or fear of failure, and procrastinating is a way to temporarily avoid that emotional discomfort. Think about it. When you postpone that important report, that difficult conversation, that project that's been on your to-do list for weeks, you're not avoiding the work itself. You're avoiding how that work makes you feel. Maybe it's the anxiety of not being up to par, the boredom of a repetitive task, the frustration of something that seems too complex, or the fear of being judged by the outcome. And here's the crucial point. Your brain is doing exactly what it's been programmed to do over millions of years of evolution. It's trying to protect you from a perceived threat. But wait, it gets even more interesting. Dr. Fuchsius Sirois, who conducted extensive research on procrastination and health at the University of Sheffield, discovered something that connects all these points in a profound way. She found a strong correlation between chronic procrastination and low self-compassion. Chronic procrastinators aren't just people who avoid emotional discomfort, they're people who are particularly hard on themselves when faced with difficulties. And here's the cycle. You postpone a task because it generates anxiety. Then you feel guilty for postponing it. This guilt increases the anxiety associated with the task, which makes it even harder to start it. So you procrastinate more. And you criticize yourself more. And the cycle continues, seeming difficult to break. When Sirois and his team began to investigate more deeply, they discovered that chronic procrastinators had significantly higher rates of stress and anxiety. Not because procrastination directly causes these conditions, but because the process of procrastinating, feeling guilty, self-criticizing, and then procrastinating even more creates a state of stress that can affect overall well-being. The stress cycle can impact various aspects of life, including sleep quality and daily energy. Procrastination is not just an annoying habit, it can affect multiple dimensions of our lives. But the most revolutionary discovery was yet to come. Dr. Joseph Ferrari of DePaul University, one of the world's leading researchers on procrastination, made a crucial distinction that completely changed the field. He identified that not all procrastination is the same. There are different types of procrastinators, and each procrastinates for fundamentally different reasons. There are excited procrastinators, who thrive under pressure and deliberately leave things to the last minute because they enjoy the adrenaline rush. There are avoidant procrastinators, who procrastinate to avoid the fear of failure or even the fear of success. And there are indecisive procrastinators, who feel overwhelmed by excessive analysis and have difficulty making decisions. This distinction is crucial because it means there is no single solution to procrastination. A person who procrastinates because they love the adrenaline rush of last-minute pressure needs a completely different approach than someone who procrastinates because they have a deep fear of being judged. Trying to force both to use the same time management techniques would be ineffective, as the underlying causes are different. Here's where the story gets really fascinating. When researchers started looking at cultural differences in procrastination, they found surprising patterns. In more collectivist cultures, where social shame and family expectations are strong, procrastination is often linked to perfectionism and the fear of disappointing others. In more individualistic cultures, it's more connected to autonomy, rebellion against authority, and the difficulty of finding personal meaning in tasks. The cultural environment in which you grow up literally shapes how your brain processes tasks and emotions. But perhaps the most transformative discovery came when scientists began testing interventions based on this new understanding of procrastination. If procrastination is fundamentally about emotional regulation and not about time management, then traditional solutions, to-do lists, rigid schedules, productivity techniques, were addressing the wrong problem. It's like trying to cure a headache by fixing the light that's bothering your eyes. You may be treating a symptom, but you're not getting to the root cause. So the researchers began testing something different. What if, instead of teaching people to be more disciplined, we taught them to be more compassionate with themselves? What if, instead of focusing on eliminating procrastination, we focused on changing the emotional relationship people have with their tasks? The results were remarkable. Studies showed that self-compassion-based interventions, where people learned to treat themselves with the same kindness they would treat a good friend, significantly reduced procrastination. Not immediately, not overnight, but consistently and sustainably over time. Another important breakthrough came from research on what scientists call self-forgiveness. In one particularly revealing study, college students who forgave themselves for procrastinating on a previous exam were much less likely to procrastinate on the next exam. Because when you forgive yourself, you break the cycle of guilt and shame that fuels future procrastination. You remove the emotional charge that makes the next task even more daunting. There are also fascinating findings about the role of concrete visualization. When researchers asked procrastinators to visualize not just the end goal, but specifically the first small, concrete steps they would need to take, procrastination decreased dramatically. Because vague, abstract tasks are far more emotionally threatening than specific, tangible steps. Your brain can't properly process writing a 20-page paper. That's an abstract, overwhelming threat. But it can process opening the document and writing an introductory paragraph. That's concrete, manageable, and far less emotionally threatening. Technology has also entered this equation in interesting ways. Researchers have begun using apps that track not only what people do, but how they feel before, during, and after procrastinating. The data revealed specific patterns. Most procrastinators feel worse after procrastinating than they would if they had simply done the task. They know this intellectually, but at the moment they are avoiding the task, the promise of immediate emotional relief is much stronger than the awareness of future regret. It's the same mechanism that makes someone eat an entire cake even knowing they will regret it later. The present relief outweighs the future cost. But here's an intriguing twist. Some researchers argue that a certain level of procrastination can actually be adaptive under certain circumstances. Professor Adam Grant, in his research on creativity, found that moderate procrastinators, not those who leave everything to the last minute, but those who give themselves time for unconscious reflection, tend to be more creative in their solutions. Because when you postpone a creative task but keep it in mind, your subconscious continues working on it. You are allowing ideas to develop, connections to be made, and non-obvious solutions to emerge. This doesn't mean all procrastination is good, far from it. But it does mean we need to be more nuanced in how we think about it. There's a difference between creative incubation and anxious avoidance. There's a difference between giving yourself space to think and running away from your responsibilities. The key is understanding your own emotional motivations. Returning to neurological findings, there's another fascinating aspect. Researchers have discovered that the brains of chronic procrastinators not only process emotions differently, but also process time differently. There's a tendency known as present bias, where future rewards or punishments seem less real and less important than those of the present. For a chronic procrastinator, this bias is amplified. The pleasure of avoiding anxiety now seems immense, while the cost of having to do the task under pressure tomorrow seems distant and abstract. But here's the good news, and it really is good news. The brain has plasticity. It can change. The connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex can be strengthened. The emotional response to challenging tasks can be recalibrated. It's not easy, it doesn't happen overnight, but it's absolutely possible. Long-term intervention studies have shown that people who were chronic procrastinators for decades were able to significantly change their patterns when they approached the problem from the right perspective. And what is that correct perspective? It's understanding that you're not lazy. You don't have a moral failing. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you from perceived threats. The challenge is that your alarm system may be too sensitively calibrated to the modern environment. Tasks that don't pose real dangers are being treated as if they were threats. The solution, then, is not to force yourself to be more disciplined. It's to recalibrate your emotional system. It's to learn to recognize when you're avoiding a task not because it's genuinely dangerous, but because your brain is having a disproportionate alarm reaction. It's to develop self-compassion so that the cycle of guilt doesn't amplify anxiety. It's to break down large tasks into small, concrete steps so that they are less emotionally threatening. It's to forgive yourself when you procrastinate so that you don't carry the emotional weight into the next task. Scientists have also discovered something important about environment and context. Chronic procrastinators tend to have more difficulty in environments with many distractions or where they lack autonomy over how and when to complete tasks. When the environment is modified to give them more control, to remove distracting triggers, and to create what psychologists call positive friction, small obstacles that make procrastination more difficult than starting the task, procrastination levels drop dramatically. Think about it in practical terms. If you always procrastinate by checking social media, leaving your phone in another room creates positive friction. If you always put off writing because the blank page is intimidating, Starting with brainstorming or a very rough draft reduces the initial emotional burden. If you procrastinate because the project seems huge, setting work sessions of just 15 minutes makes the beginning less daunting. There are also interesting findings about the role of community and accountability. When procrastinators work with accountability partners, not people who judge them, but people who simply check in and support them, task completion rates increase significantly. Because externalizing responsibility reduces some of the internal emotional burden. You're no longer just fighting against yourself, there's someone by your side. Perhaps one of the most powerful revelations is about identity. Many chronic procrastinators internalize procrastination as part of who they are. They say, "I am a procrastinator," in the same way they would say, "I have brown eyes." But researchers have found that when people shift this from a fixed identity to a modifiable behavior, when they start saying, "I sometimes procrastinate," instead of, "I am a procrastinator," change becomes much more possible. Because if it's who you are, then it's immutable. But if it's something you do, then it's something you can learn to do differently. Studies have also revealed profound connections between procrastination and meaning. The more meaningful and connected to your values a task seems, the less likely you are to procrastinate on it. This explains why you might procrastinate for weeks on a work report, but spend immediate hours on a personal project you love. It's not about ability or discipline, it's about emotional connection and meaning. When researchers helped people find or create meaning in the tasks they were avoiding, procrastination naturally decreased. And now we arrive at the heart of this transformed narrative. Chronic procrastination is not a sign that you are a bad or weak person. It is often a sign that you are sensitive, that you feel things deeply, that your nervous system is trying to protect you, even if in a misguided way. It's a sign that you need more kindness towards yourself, not more punishment. More understanding, not more judgment. More emotional tools, not just productivity tools. The implications of these findings are vast. They change how we should educate children, how we should structure work environments, how we should think about mental health and well-being. If procrastination is fundamentally about emotional regulation, then we need to teach emotional regulation. We need to create environments that support emotional well-being, not just efficiency. We need to stop pathologizing a behavior that is, to a large extent, an understandable human response to an increasingly complex and demanding world. So, if you're someone who struggles with chronic procrastination, know this: science is on your side. You're not alone. Your brain is functioning in understandable ways, and it can only benefit from a gentle and compassionate recalibration. It starts with understanding that the journey isn't about fighting your willpower, it's about developing a healthier relationship with discomfort, with uncertainty, with the possibility of imperfection. The tools are available. Self-compassion can be learned. Forgiveness can be practiced. Tasks can be reframed in less threatening ways. Environments can be restructured. Meaning can be found or created. And with each small step, with each moment of kindness to yourself instead of self-criticism, with each task broken down into something manageable, your brain learns. Neural connections strengthen. The amygdala calms down. The prefrontal cortex takes over more control. Change happens. And perhaps the most profound lesson from all this research is this: we are all human, imperfect, struggling, doing the best we can with the brains and stories we carry. Procrastination is not the enemy. Ruthless self-criticism is. Lack of compassion is. The belief that we should be perfect machines and not complex, emotional human beings is. When we change that narrative, when we embrace our full humanity, real change becomes not only possible but inevitable. May each person who watches this content find within themselves the kindness and understanding that science now confirms to be the true path to transformation. May we build a world that recognizes our shared humanity, our shared challenges, and our shared capacity for growth and change. And may we always remember that we are so much more than our habits, so much more than our struggles, so much more than any label that society or we ourselves place on who we are. May the Lord God bless every step of this journey of self-discovery and transformation, illuminating the path with wisdom and compassion for all who seek to live a fuller and more authentic life.